landed there, what did you uncover in that residency? How did you bring this idea of choreography of thought or choreography of attention into your practice there?
The first things that we did, and I say we because I also collaborated with a few other dance artists here in Rotterdam in that residency, was to kind of map and understand the site that we were in architecturally and what that asked of movement that was already in the museum. So we kind of studied the architecture of the building and tried to kind of unpack the implied dramaturgy of people's movements. And also from like a curatorial point of view, what does this space ask us to see or to notice, and what doesn't it really bring to our attention? And I was also pretty sure, because I don't know how many people are in this room that are familiar and not familiar with dancing museums, but and my particular situation working in Rotterdam for the last 2-3 years, I can just briefly give some context to that maybe. Boijmans van Beuningen, the museum that I've been collaborating with, is going through a renovation process, meaning their actual building couldn't physically host me. So I've been kind of nomadically having my residencies in host venues, other museums that are not partners of the project, but that are that were kind of surrogate places for me to work. So I've been kind of museum hopping for all my residencies. So I've gotten the chance to discover many different types of museums, but also just different venues, locations. And
in your first residency, you maybe we can call this our first mark on the map. Your first landmark. You could speak a bit about the treasure hunt that you designed.
Yeah, true. Yeah. So one of the kind of more practical experiments that we did, or kind of one choreographic proposal that we tried in the Schiedam Stedelijk Museum in Schiedam, took the form of a treasure hunt, or we chose to give that form to the research in order to have a concrete form to process some questions that I was interested in learning more about through, let's say. We designed a kind of one-on-one experiential itinerary through the museum where people would sign up for their respective slots, one person or two people, so it was one person or a couple coming. And we would take them on a journey through the building, and an alternative route, let's say, through the rooms of the building based on clues and hints that would kind of reveal a parcours as they went along, a little bit like a dot-to-dot game, let's say. And they would themselves navigate between these hints and clues, and in order to kind of solve the riddles that would bring them to the next place, let's say, or the next event which we would offer. And this was a mix of like very carefully planned coincidences, kind of notes just falling out of our pockets, or a little kind of symbol that they would recognize in the next room. And it was a little playful choreographic structure that would guide them through the museum, but on their own behalf. A kind of hidden trajectory that unfolded as they went along, let's say.
What were you interested in? What kind of movement were you interested in this proposal?
Well, first of all, I was interested in the movement of the gaze. When I came into the museum, it was apparent that like the priority given to the scopic in these rooms is striking, like to the visual. And there was a whole lot of looking. I was watching the visitors, watching the artworks, and who were watched by the security staff. So there was like all this kind of network of looking, and I was wondering if we could like depart from that as a premise for curiosity, but maybe to see if we could stimulate that curiosity to discover other things than the most apparent features of the rooms, let's say. And I think there were like three main kind of core key notions that we were interested in understanding or learning more about, connected to participation. One is consent, the other one was agency, and the third one is obviously curiosity, which are interlinked, but those were the three kind of key features that we wanted to unpack by giving this form of a treasure hunt to the research in that specific residency.
How did you build or the relationship between consent and agency in your proposal?
Well, it was clear to me that if I were to do anything in the museum rooms at all, being a public space, I need to hold that space in a way that provides possibility or option for people to engage or not, and in different ways. That was clear. And I also knew that we needed to provide a sense of clarity in our invitation in order for people to be able and feel welcome to accept our invitation or decline it. And what we did in the treasure hunt was that we would, kind of like Hansel and Gretel, like leave little cues behind, and it was up to the visitor to take that invitation to go to the next event, let's say. And one of the ways that we decided to kind of work around the notion of consent was to have physical objects, like little gifts, little tokens almost, that became symbol of consent, given to them at the end of as part of the clue, let's say. So that would be one piece of a larger puzzle. So if they would bring that to the next place, then we would read that as a kind of, yes, I'm still in for the experience. And if they would leave that behind or not return it back to us, then obviously we would see them go and they had decided upon the duration of their experience themselves. So that was like one concrete example of how we solved that.
And what kind of reactions did you get from people who embarked on your proposal?
Generally, I think people felt quite cared for and accompanied. We also spoke amongst us in the group that we distributed the roles throughout the parcours so that there would at all times be someone kind of hovering around the participant in case there would be questions or in case they would be lost. We could always approach them and give them the information that they didn't have or needed, but without kind of walking the path with them. So like we would always have an eye, and we would like change around who had that responsibility so that they didn't feel supervised. So these kind of like sensitivities we tried to incorporate in the proposal. I think also like just the very fact, like the way we worked through curiosity as a core element was literally by giving them the opportunity to discover, but not the obligation to do so. So in order to find the next event, they had to go towards or move towards. And of course, we just explored how much was enough information, how much was too little. And that's also was part of the kind of understanding how we use language to give the information that is needed or introduce them to the premise of the proposal, so they don't have to like spend energy on that, for instance, was also something that we worked on. The whole experience starts with a little introduction, verbal introduction, where I meet them face to face and explain the duration and the principle, and then kind of we send them off. Yeah.
But I appreciate the illustration you've given us of trying to activate an attitude of curiosity or a detective attitude as you go through the museum, and that it's well accompanied and cared for. And I think that this is a little piece of or a good visual of many activities that have happened inside of this project. I'd like to move us over to another practice of yours called a mapping practice that you have. Maybe you can just share a little bit about this mapping practice.
Yeah, a mapping practice, it's funny because I'm always a little bit embarrassed when I speak about this, because it's not a very innovative practice at all, and it's certainly not something that's been very consistent in like my work. It's pretty basic. It's just a kind of writing practice that I have suggested or proposed sometimes when we come into a new room, which is basically to draw or write the space on paper, to make a map or a diagram of the space we're in. And kind of implied in that proposal is you have to choose a point of view, because I mean, we're not looking for like a city plan, let's say. And then the second part of the practice would be introducing each other to those maps in order to kind of put oneself in each other's shoes and discover new aspects of the room, and kind of unpack the room in that way and discover detail and also kind of ways of seeing. But the practice is pretty simple, but it's kind of based on this idea, or kind of, if we think of a map as a document that contains movement, or at least is meant to put in motion the one that reads it, then it can manifest as a drawing or as a text or as a script or a score or a diagram. It's some kind of representation of that space, or a description of that space, a translation, let's say.
While you look for your screen share, I'll share a little bit. I joined this practice of Bassano about almost 2 years ago. And what I really appreciated is how it made visible the multiple viewpoints that are in each gallery space at a time. And it also locates or places a choice making from where people are viewing from. So where do they want to draw their map? What do they want to bring to another person's attention? And then how do you share that map? So great. Here we have some examples here. Do you want to tell us a bit about these?
Yeah, these are just like maps that have been made in like workshops or in rehearsals or stuff of different rooms, and they become kind of autonomous little documents. It's when we look at them like this, it doesn't really matter if we know the room that they draw upon or not. But it's just to show a kind of variety of approaches in order to find a way to show you what I see. And I think, sharing or under, like, for instance, we were in Finland and we did, I don't know if the exact map is here, it doesn't really matter, but there was one person whose map was only 3 lines kind of intersecting. And when he kind of showed it to us, we couldn't really make sense of it until he positioned us, he placed us where he had drawn the map, and then it became immediately apparent to everyone that this was the corner. And this is interesting for me also because it kind of speaks about reading rather than merely kind of looking. And I mean, I'm not an etymological expert, but the difference between seeing or looking, I think has to do with, as I said in the beginning, not necessarily merely passively consuming visual data, looking, but seeing we also use in order to say, like, I see, I understand, like, it makes sense. I move towards, I read, like, I make sense of, so these are just some examples, I don't know, to give an impression of maps that have been made. Yeah. Maybe
from close observation from memory.
Yeah.
It's a nice shift.
Yeah. Voila. I mean, coming a little bit back to like language and writing, which is is fundamental to the way that I work, and where paper is also a support, and the theater is also a support, and as well as the museum. Like every time, wherever there is information that can be read, there is always a support that renders that information visible. And I think a lot of the work that I'm interested in kind of getting at is precisely about how we read, and also according to which supports do we read. So like that's the kind of dimension that I was happy to discover that it came out in this way.
It's a natural link to bring the way you're describing support right now to the way that you supported the journey of the public through the treasure hunt. And I think that a lot of that has come out in this project is how do we support each other through the difficult conversations that have emerged, especially in the last year. What support do we give to each other in the project, and to the public when we're able to meet them, and to the topics that urgently need attention and address and restoration.